On behalf of the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight to participate in this important start to a process for a project that I would say, at least in my career at RTC, is probably the one that's drawn the most interest. So we assumed there was going to be interest, but the amount of people participating far exceeded what we projected. So we apologize if we ran out of materials. It was an underestimation. So I'm not going to get into the details. We have the project manager and the consultant we hired, and they're going to go through with detail how we got to the point we're at on this road. But I wanted to talk first about the bigger picture, because I think it's important for people to understand where this particular project fits in the issue we're trying to address. And that issue is the increasing and ever-growing concern about I-80 East. And I'm talking about primarily from Vista out to the Tri-Center at USA Parkway. So our team will talk to you about the purpose and need, which really is the point where we start with all our projects so we can know if we've achieved what we're trying to do. But this conversation and the thought about this from the local transportation world really started several years ago with the Nevada Department of Transportation, who was aware of the issue on I-80. And so they commissioned a study to look at what are some of the alternatives that could help with this situation. And they identified 3 alternatives. One of them being the widening of Interstate 80 from 4 to 6 lanes. The other one was to look at a road connecting South Meadows in southeast Reno to a southern area on the USA Parkway and kind of at the south end of the Tri-Center. And then a third alternative, which was a north connection, which is primarily what we're going to be talking about tonight. So NDOT had that study. That study concluded that the wisest choice was to move forward with widening Interstate 80. NDOT has proceeded with that. They've hired a consultant who did the design, and they've actually hired a contractor. So it's my understanding they have somebody under contract to move forward with the widening of Interstate 80. The information we've received is that they will complete the design and start construction in 2027. The window for construction is somewhere between 3 and 4 years. As you can imagine, that's a pretty monumental lift to go out there and widen that road with the river and the hillsides and all the challenges about that, and a railroad too. I won't throw that in. So NDOT made that decision. They proceeded that way, but they also then revisited the south route. So NDOT commissioned a study to look at the south route, again, from South Meadows Parkway connecting into the Tri-Center. And they completed that study, and that study basically wasn't acted upon, but it's there. And so our board at RTC asked us to, and directed us to go explore the north route, because nobody had done any analysis on the north route. There was conversation, which many of you are probably familiar with, on a toll road. This is not the toll road. This is a question that was posed to us, which is, if there were a road to be built between USA Parkway and the Spanish Springs East Sparks area, where should it be? So that was our mission, to go out and explore that and come back with a study, which is the starting point on what does that option look like, what does it entail, who would it impact, all those questions which you're going to hear about. But the other thing our board did, which is different from what NDOT said, is they asked us to look at a 4th option, and that was to look at commuter rail. And having a train that ran from downtown Reno and downtown Sparks that connected to the Tri-Center. The goal there being to get the passenger vehicles out from the mix within all of the freight that everybody's seen increasing along Interstate 80. So what we've done is the board authorized us, and we're working with Story County, NDOT, Tesla, and Panasonic. Collectively, we funded an $800,000 study to hire the best firm that we could find that knows how to work with the railroad. And fortunately, our initial indications from our conversation with the railroad is that they are interested in talking to us about it. So we've submitted to them some concepts which haven't gone public yet because quite honestly, unless we get Union Pacific's consent, there's really probably no way we can do the commuter rail. But I wanted everybody to understand that that is alive and under discussion. So by the end of this exercise or this effort that we're doing at RTC, we should have good data and good analysis on all 4 alternatives. Ultimately, what will have to be done, which in great part will be influenced by all of you and all the people in the community, is make some choices. If at the end of the day, the right choice is only to do Interstate 80 widening, that's probably what will happen. If the choice is to pursue commuter rail, then we're going to have to follow that path. If the choice is to do as one, possibly, or maybe the only other secondary solution, the construction of this road, then obviously you'll be hearing about that. The one thing I would just share with all of you is this is not even close to being real. There is no money allocated for this road. So this is the start. This is the start where we've done the technical analysis, and this is the part, what's most important about tonight, where we start socializing with all of you as a community to see what your thoughts and interests are. And ultimately, the study that's presented to the RTC board will include not only the consultants' technical conclusions, which you'll see tonight, but also a analysis and basically a cumulative response to our board and what did all the people in the community say. So with that, I'm going to hand it over now to the team that actually knows the details. We've really tried to focus this process on everybody having a chance to provide their comments. Like I said, it's the very beginning. I can't tell you tonight like what comes next. They will tell you generally what's next, but we will be very responsive and adaptive and flexible as this process moves forward. So Brian, if you wouldn't mind coming up.
Thank you. This is the Northeast Connector Feasibility and Corridor Study. This started earlier this year, and we'll get into the detail on that, but to give everyone a frame of reference, I wanted to highlight where our study focused on. This feasibility study focused on the eastern limit of Sparks Spanish Springs out to the Tri-Center or USA Parkway interchange and north of the I-80 corridor. So what is this study? Why are we doing this? So the Northeast Connector Alignment Study wants to focus on finding a redundant east-west corridor connecting the Tri-Center area to the Spanish Springs Sparks area. So that is why we are doing this study. Traffic, that's been a main focus of topic tonight. We all know there is an abundance of traffic on the I-80 corridor that is causing delays and is a concern. We've had a 300% increase out to the Tri-Center workforce recently, which is a lot of traffic. We've also focused on where are these trips being generated from. You can kind of see in the map in the upper left what we call our heat map, where it's showing where most of the trips are generated going out to the Tri-Center. And you can see that it's north of the I-80 corridor, mainly in the Spanish Springs, Sparks, and the North Valley area. The speed on I-80 has significantly reduced. If you've driven out there in the AM or PM hours, you notice a significant reduction in speed, and this is without an accident or an incident on the road. This is due to just pure volume of traffic on the corridor. If there is an incident, then that can definitely grow. It can be gridlock, and it can take hours for you to get back into the area. Right now, I believe we're averaging about 150 accidents a year, so that is every other day an accident is occurring on this corridor. So that is something that we are taking into consideration and focusing on. The goals of this study. We focused on making sure that we are focusing on reducing congestion. We are supporting the economic growth in our area, increasing the reliability for people to get back home or have an alternate route, and to inform regional decisions. So these are the goals that we focused on through our evaluation. So where did it start? It started back in February when we initiated this project, and we went through a 2-level screening process. It's kind of highlighted in the report and on our boards, and we'll kind of get into the weeds of this shortly when Brian goes into that. But our level 1 screening kind of focused on just a traffic perspective of analyzing what kind of volume or demand would be generated if a road were to be built. We take that into our level 2 screening where we kind of analyze it further with our environmental concerns, travel time, and so forth. Right now we're at the draft report phase. The last piece of this puzzle is to get the public comments, public input, answer your questions and concerns, and incorporate that into our report. We're looking to finish this up early next year, so that is why we are here tonight. Zooming out from just the project schedule, where are we in the grand scheme of things? Right now, we are at the very first step of identifying the feasibility report of this. We're just looking at what could be done. There's multiple steps after this. We're not going to construction tomorrow. If anything were to go further, this would go into a NEPA process, the environmental review. Then it would go into a potential design and construction phase. So we are at step one of this. That is why we're here tonight, to get that public input early and so we can incorporate into any further action. Some of the stakeholders that have been along the way with us, we haven't been doing this by ourselves, behind closed doors. We've been involving City of Sparks, the Nevada DOT, Story County, Washoe County, BLM, and we do this through our Technical Advisory Committee reviews. Those are called our TAC meetings. So we've had 3 TAC meetings along the way to make sure we're all staying aligned in the purpose and the goals of this project. So we've had those throughout the year, and we are here tonight with our public outreach. So I do encourage you to provide public comments and inputs. That will be open through January 16th. So please, if you need more time to write a comment, you have that time to do so. So don't feel like it's rushed to complete tonight. Now we're going to get into the weeds, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian Gant, our project manager from our consulting firm, and he will go into that.
All right, thanks, Brian. So to get into the process of this feasibility study and how we ultimately ended up with an initial recommendation, kind of want to walk you through the details. But the way we typically do that is through kind of a methodical screening process. Here, as Brian mentioned, we had a 2-level screening process where we looked at traffic first, weeded out some alternatives, and then took a deeper dive. And this pretty much follows what you would do when you're trying to do, figure out something similar in your life. Let's say you're going to go buy a house or something. Well, you first figure out where the neighborhood is, and then you figure out what kind of house you want, and you kind of answer one question at a time and narrow down to an answer. And that's really what this screening process is all about. Answer one question at a time, reduce the things you're looking at, and then take another step forward. So our alternative screening process starts out by coming up with the universe of alternatives. What's every option that we're going to take a look at? And so if you looked at some of the boards back here, you saw kind of some colorful spaghetti on some of those maps. That's our universe of alternatives. We'll get into that in a second. The first thing we did was take a look at the traffic element of that, and then those potential corridors that didn't seem to attract a whole lot of traffic. You screen those out, and then you focus time and energy looking at some of the engineering elements of those that remain. And through that process, you end up with one concept kind of rising to the top. So before I get into the details of what that process looked like, I want to make sure we had a baseline understanding of what kind of road we're even talking about here. The type of traffic volumes that we're talking about that were evaluated through what's called a travel demand model support a 2-lane roadway, 1 lane in each direction. So we're not talking about a freeway, we're not talking about an expressway, we're not even talking about the need for a 4-lane facility for typical operations under normal conditions. So everything we're talking about here, all the lines on paper, are considered a 2-lane roadway. So that first step where I mentioned we take the long list of alternatives, that's our spaghetti map over there on the side of all the alternatives that were identified. And the first thing we did was evaluate those for how much traffic they might carry. And there's a range of different options that were identified, starting to the north with the red line. That would be an extension of La Posada over to the east. Coming down from there would be a connection at Vista, here where Golden Eagle Park is, in that existing signalized intersection. Another option that came up was tying into Vista kind of south of the Red Hawk Golf Course for the Hills Course. Another option, working our way down, was an extension tying into Los Altos Parkway. Another one would be extending Prairie Way all the way across. And just to kind of test the concept, instead of something going west to east, well, what if we had another north-south option, that's the blue one, that would tie La Posada down to I-80, so kind of paralleling Vista and Sparks Boulevard. It gave us a good range of what type of different options are out there, and let's test those to get an idea of how much traffic they might carry. And we used what's called the regional travel demand model. Without getting too technical, every metropolitan area has one of these models that puts in land use, different types of uses, whether that's commercial, residential, industrial, the intensity of those, and the background roadway network, and grows those out to project what future traffic volumes will look like. That was a tool that we used for that. So a lot of people have asked the questions, have you considered additional development in the area? Have you considered other roadways that might be built? And the answer is yes, because those are baked into that model, because we're looking at everything from a 2050 timeframe. That's the analysis time period we're looking at. And so this table here, and it's available out there on the boards if you want to dive into it, shows our 2015 ADTs coming out of that model. ADT is average daily traffic. So many cars on the road in a day on an average basis. And the general takeaway from this first level of screening was the further south you go with the origination of that western terminus, the less traffic it carries. And it makes sense because I-80 is a faster facility. It's already assumed to be widened in this model. And so you would have a faster travel time than going on a 45-mile-per-hour roadway through the mountains. So the closer you get to I-80, the less traffic that these alternatives would attract. So with that, all the alternatives except for the Vista option tying in by Golden Eagle and an extension of La Posada over to Trick, those two were carried forward because they looked like they could attract a decent amount of traffic in comparison, and all the other options were screened out from that factor in what we call the level 1 screen. So this slide here shows you the results of that with all those other options screened out, showed in gray, and the 2 in blue carried forward into level 2. And level 2 is where we start doing some engineering and getting into things like alignments and costs and all that kind of good stuff. So we're looking at that level 2, and we're start to do the engineering piece. We're looking at things like constraint avoidance. That's a very fun way of saying, watch out for the environmental stuff or other constraints that you can't touch. Earthwork and cost, there's a lot of earthwork associated with a project like this, so that gets taken into consideration. How easy it is to construct. Agencies have to maintain this. How easy would a new facility be to maintain? And a range of other factors. And we're not going to dive in too deep into those because those are in the draft report if you want to get into the details. But to quickly and to expedite the process of evaluating those engineering elements in our level 2 screening, we applied a tool called Quantum. Now just to give you a brief overview of what this does is you put in terrain information, topography. We actually had, if you're familiar with the term, we had LiDAR data, so pretty good data from a terrain standpoint. You put in potential costs, you put in your geometric criteria, because we're talking about things like vertical grades of a road and radii and things like that, and our 2-lane roadway cross-section. What this tool does is it takes that information and it runs millions of iterations to come up with a top 25 most optimized corridor from a beginning point to an end point. And I'll give you an idea of what that looks like. Here is outputs from that quantum model for one of the options coming into this level 2 screening, which would be an extension of La Posada. What you'll see in these red crosshatch areas are places that an alignment would not want to touch. So we all know about petroglyphs and areas out there that we wouldn't want to touch, but we also identified existing housing developments. Don't want to run a new road straight through rooftops and things like that. What you're seeing here is the top 25 output from this tool for connecting La Posada over to Trick. And the general takeaway with the best alignment showing in blue is it wants to work its way to the north to get up to a high enough elevation near Spanish Springs Peak before it can tie into the plateau to the east and work its way down. There's a much bigger elevation change to the north than what you will see on the south. So without getting into too much detail, just wanted to get a picture in your mind of what this looks like when we're doing this type of analysis. For the southern corridor, this is what the output looked like. The highest ranking, the ones in blue, tend to want to come south around that avoidance, environmental avoidance area, and work its way over. And if you'll notice from the colors of the map in the background, where pink is your higher elevation and yellow is your lower elevation, you'll see the southern alignment goes to a much lower elevation than the one did to the north, where it's going through more of that pink terrain. It's just a little higher, a little more rugged up in that northern section. So through that process, we ended up with two general corridors that had a little bit of engineering to it. The La Posada extension, which you see at the top, and it has that curling action to get to that elevation that's needed, and the Vista at Golden Eagle version coming down and around and tying over to USA Parkway. So now that we had those corridors established from a rough engineering standpoint, we're able to evaluate those against other factors to see how they compare to each other. So here are the different screening factors, or level 2 screening factors, taking those corridors and saying, okay, how do these perform when we look at things like environmental impact, looking at travel time now that we have a more defined alignment, right-of-way impacts, or a range of different things. So we can kind of compare these two different corridors against each other and see how they shake out. And to kind of zoom to the results of what that analysis looked like, we ranked everything based on a scoring of 1 through 3, 3 being the most promising for that scoring factor, and 1 being the least promising. That gave us a numerical way that we could sum up, and that corridor, which got the most points, if you will, was a little bit more preferred versus the other, considering these different screening factors. If you want to get into the details of all these, they're all in the draft feasibility report online. For example, environmental impact has like 12 different sub-elements that were evaluated. That's all in there if you want to dive into the details. But you can see through this kind of numeric process that we did in level 2, that the Vista corridor rose a little bit up compared to the La Posada corridor, with the main differences being right-of-way impact, because the Vista corridor is very much on BLM land, where the La Posada one touches a lot more private property. And then a few differences elsewhere in between. The other element that comes into play as part of the level 2 screening, that's the engineering side of the equation. There's the cost side of the equation. And now that we had a kind of a rough corridor to cost out, we developed a conceptual cost estimate. And as you can see, the Vista corridor came in order of magnitude around $275 million, kind of all in, including design, right-of-way, and elements like that, where the La Posada version was around $450 million. So wouldn't take those numbers to the bank, but it gives you an order of magnitude feel for the differences in cost between those two corridors. So based on the evaluation and the differences in costs, we arrived at a recommended corridor, looking, and that being that Vista Golden Eagle tie-in coming down around the south side and heading over to Trick. With that, and along the way, we've heard a lot of concerns about potential cut-through traffic through the neighborhoods. And so with that, the recommendation is to keep considering an additional connection up to La Posada to help spread that traffic out, so you don't have a single point of influence, and to avoid that neighborhood cut-through traffic. So the recommendation is to consider the entire package that you see up there moving forward.
Thanks, Brian. Just to kind of close out, I wanted to highlight again that we are in the very beginning phase of this. This is the feasibility level. We still have NEPA, design, and construction if those are chosen to go forward. So that's going to conclude our presentation. However, we will still be here for another hour or so to answer any questions over at the exhibit boards. Please feel free to provide comments via the website or in your packet tonight. Those listening online, we will still be taking public comments through January 16th. Thank you again for coming out.